Hey over there, Joe Lunchbox.
And Joy Nightingale.
And today we have landed in North Merrick here on Long Island. Now we're going to explore something interesting today. It's a tiny video we're going to have today actually, because we're exploring an area called Tiny Town. Now you might be wondering what Tiny Town is. A lot of people think...
What is Tiny Town?
I'm gonna say... Well, actually, I'm not going to say. I'm going to say what people think first.
Okay.
So, a lot of people think it might have been where the Keebler elves lived, or circus people, or stuff along those lines. But we're going to debunk those myths and teach you what Tiny Town really was. And sorry if we disappoint you. You might be a tiny bit disappointed when you find the truth, because it's interesting. It's history of Long Island, but it's not some cool secret thing. Why there are these little tiny houses? But you'll learn. So step right up. Let's go for this ride. All right. So the truth. So in this area of North Merrick, there's a few tiny houses still remains. There used to be tons more, but with development over the years of Long Island, they're gone. And the reason they were tiny houses, it was actually camp meeting grounds. Annual Methodist Camp meeting were held here of this marker from 1869 to the early 1920s. Now, it is interesting that it was the Long Island Camp Meeting Association for the Methodist Church from Brooklyn and Queens, and they bought 60 acres out here in 1869 to hold their annual camp meetings. And when they first did, by 1873, there was a lot of tent campsites, but there was already around a dozen little cottages that they had. And then by the 1900s, there was actually 60 of these cottages. Like I was saying, things have changed, development has happened, but we still do see a few of these tiny houses. Now, people just didn't know what this was about, so they assumed these tiny houses were for people of smaller stature, but they actually were just little cottages for people coming to this Methodist camp. Now, it's interesting, if you see how the roads are set up, they're concentric circles. Around each of these circles, you can see there was actually the way the roads are set up with the spokes. Those were the tent sites turned into the cabins, which are these tiny houses. And the middle was actually the tabernacle, where they used to have the services. In the Methodist, being outside for the services was very important back then. And they used to have, the camp was here during the summers for 10 days out of the summer, with 3 services a day, then a Bible reading at night. So that's where that would have been held. So we're going to walk around and show you some other signs that throw back to that Methodist camp meetings that used to be in this area of North Merrick. We have another sign talking about Town of Hempstead Historical Site, Campground Chapel, circle 1870. And here you can see what I mean by one of those tiny houses. Just using Joy as reference, we can see how small the gate is, how small the roof peaks come up to, and it was a tiny house. Like I was saying, not all these still exist. There is a lot of development, but here is one of them. And like we were talking, that sadly a lot of these houses are being torn down. You can see here new developments being built. And the other possibility we're thinking this house might have been is a lot of the tiny houses people built up onto, creating normal size houses. So that might have been something like that happened here. One of the other throwbacks to that time of the Methodist camps here actually are some of the street signs. Like right here, we're on Peck Avenue. That sign we were reading at the beginning of this video is Peck Avenue and Fletcher Avenue. You see, Peck Avenue is named after Jesse T. Peck, who was a Methodist bishop up in Syracuse. So a lot of the road names tie in to preachers that were there or the Methodist religion itself. There's a Jerusalem Avenue, there's a camp, and roads like that tie in to that Methodist camp. Dow Avenue is another one of those streets named after people from back then. Dow Avenue is actually from Lorenzo Dow, who was also a Methodist preacher. Very interesting, as you can see Joy walking, how these roads are the concentric circles. They definitely are tiny roads to go with this tiny town. I see garages with these wooden doors. Looks like an older structure. And I don't know, but this could date back to that time, around the turn of the century. Found another one of the tiny houses that still exist to this day. You really can see, like, I would come up to where the gutters and leaders are on that peak. And next door looks like one that they might have added a second floor to. That looks like it started off as one of these tiny homes. We've been walking around these roads for a few minutes now, and it is sad how few of these still exist. Just think, by, I think I said the 1920s, there was 60 of these. We've seen about 3 that look like tiny houses, and maybe 2 others that were built up. There's one more road we're going to see. One more road. Hopefully we find at least one more of these tiny houses. But it is sad that this thing that people used to wonder about is fading away into past history. That's why we're here documenting it, because stuff like this is interesting and it should be known. So right now we're hitting Wesley Avenue off Kingsley. Now Wesley Avenue is one of the most important of, like I was saying, these names, because Wesley is named after John Wesley, the English clergyman who founded Methodism. And that's why he is the inner concentric circle, because the wooden tabernacle would have been in the middle of this, and this is where the church meetings would have been held. And just think, as many as 10,000 people a day attended those Methodist camps. Visiting ministers conducted the services at 10:30 in the morning, 2:30 in the afternoon, 7:30 at night, and the Bible readings were at 8:30 at night. All right around here. And the campgrounds going around, people just here learning, having a good time, praying together. Would have been a cool experience. On the corner of Wesley Avenue and Central, we actually found another one of these Town of Hempstead historical sites. Campground Minister's House, circa 1870. Methodist Episcopal Campgrounds, House of Worship, converted to a private residence after 1900. Ornate woodwork is typical of all campground cottages. This one is in a tiny house, but it's a historical house. We found 2 more of the houses. You can see what they were saying, the ornate woodwork on the peak of this house. Another one. We were talking to a woman talking about how some of the houses, because they're landmarked, can't be touched. Others, like this was a tiny house till recently, and they tore it down and built up a bigger house, even though it still is a small house. She said these windows were so low, dogs could look out of them when this house existed. Here we have a really small one. You can see how small the door is, low the windows are. Here's another good representation. We have 2 vans. They're taller than the house. Another one of the houses that looks like it's built up. And it is interesting how the next block is literally at the back of these houses. The blocks themselves were only 1 block long. Because if you see this Wesley one, like I was saying, is the center circle. So none of these houses in the middle would have been here. This is where the tabernacle would have been, where they were all coming to pray. And you can see the next road's literally right there, back of the house. Because think, it was set up as little campsites originally before the tiny houses were built for the Methodist camps. Came across what I think is one of the prettiest ones we've seen so far. I like all the woodwork around the peaks of the house. Little green front. One last house. I love the brick on this one. Look at the stones on the chimney. Oh, that's beautiful. Joy's trying to see if she can read it. The Historical Society of Merrick designates this house at Wesley Avenue as part of the historical heritage something, an original bungalow of the campground circa 1889.
I think it says like this house demonstrates an original house bungalow of the campgrounds.
But yeah, you can see how beautiful these things were. The stonework, the smaller windows, and an awesome birdhouse, which is a tiny house too. So there you have it, the truth about Tiny Town. Now, I know it would have been more interesting, the stories that people have, if these tiny houses were because the people were tiny that lived in them.
That would have been a cute story.
But no, it is interesting knowing about the Methodist camp, and it is sad how few of these houses still exist. I'm glad some of them are historical, landmarked, that they could always stay like this.
And then some people actually did not even want to touch the houses themselves.
It is always interesting. Like, I would think you would move to an area like this because of the history. Some people just move here because they see a little piece of land and want to tear it down and build a bigger house. I would be the person that wants to move to an area because of the history. But it is sad because they're going. So it is something to come see while you still have a chance. But the one thing is, this isn't a tourist attraction. This is a residential neighborhood with people just trying to go about their lives. So if you do come,
just walk around and enjoy it.
Be respectful to the people because this is just a residential area. But I think it was some interesting facts, and I think we could call it.
I think so.
Tiny town here in North Merrick, New York. Been there, done that. Remember, folks, safe travels.
Good eats.
And live life. I just saw a squirrel run up the street. I'm looking for his tiny house. Where'd you go, Mr. Squirrel? Where'd you go?